The phone rang at exactly 11:47 on a Tuesday night, shattering the quiet of my Seattle apartment. Dad's voice cut through the speaker like broken glass. "Eric, I need $820,000. Tomorrow morning, no delays." His tone carried that familiar mixture of desperation and entitlement that had defined my childhood. "Madison's in trouble again, and you're going to fix it." I stared at my reflection in the dark window, watching myself smile as I calmly replied, "Okay, Dad, I'll handle it." 4 hours later, I was boarding a red-eye flight to Denver with nothing but a carry-on bag and a plan that would destroy everything my father thought he knew about his precious daughter. As the plane lifted off into the darkness above Seattle, I finally allowed myself to process what had just happened. $820,000. Dad had delivered that number like he was asking me to pick up groceries, not bail out my 32-year-old sister from what he claimed was another gambling problem. But I knew better. I had known better for months. Growing up in suburban Dayton, Ohio, Madison could do absolutely no wrong in Dad's eyes. She was his princess, his golden child who could charm her way out of any situation with tears and promises to do better. When she dropped out of Ohio State twice, Dad called it finding herself. When her photography business failed after 6 months, Dad said she was too creative for traditional success. When her marriage to Tom lasted exactly 14 months, Dad blamed Tom for not understanding artistic temperaments. Meanwhile, I worked 2 jobs through my engineering degree at Case Western, never asked for a dime, and built my software consulting firm from nothing. But somehow, I was always the one expected to clean up Madison's messes. Always the reliable son who would step in when the golden child stumbled. The flight attendant offered me coffee, and I accepted, knowing I would need the caffeine for what was coming. Because this time was different. This time, I knew exactly what Madison had done, and it was so much worse than Dad realized. 3 months ago, my friend Jake from college had called me with concerns about some transactions he had noticed at First National Bank, where he worked as a loan officer. Dad's construction company, Hartwell Contracting, had been one of Jake's clients for 15 years. But lately, Jake had seen some irregularities that worried him. "Eric, I probably shouldn't be telling you this," Jake had said during that phone call in August, "but someone's been moving money around in ways that don't make sense. Large withdrawals, transfers to accounts I can't trace, signatures that look off. Your dad might want to check into it." But when I casually brought up the company finances during a family barbecue the next weekend, Dad had gotten defensive and changed the subject. Madison, who had been working as the company's office manager for the past 3 years, had quickly steered the conversation toward her latest art project. That was when I knew something was seriously wrong, so I started digging. Quietly, carefully, using contacts I had made during my years in business. What I found made my stomach turn. Madison hadn't just been gambling away Dad's money. She had been systematically embezzling from Hartwell Contracting for 3 years, using her position and Dad's trust to forge signatures, redirect client payments, and even mortgage company property without Dad's knowledge. The gambling debt Dad mentioned tonight was just the tip of the iceberg. Madison had been using the stolen money to fund a lifestyle she couldn't afford, and when that ran out, she had turned to high-stakes poker games and sports betting, trying to win back what she had already stolen. Instead, she had dug herself deeper into a hole that threatened to destroy everything Dad had spent 30 years building. As the plane reached cruising altitude, I opened my laptop and accessed the encrypted folder where I had been storing evidence for the past month. Bank records showing Madison's forged signatures. Security footage from the office that my friend Marcus, who installed the surveillance system, had quietly copied for me. Recorded phone conversations where Madison admitted to borrowing money from client accounts. I had hired a private investigator named David Chen 6 weeks ago when I realized the scope of what Madison was doing. David was a former FBI agent who specialized in white-collar crime, and what he had uncovered was staggering. Madison had not just been stealing money. She had been selling company equipment and pocketing the proceeds. She had been firing long-time employees and keeping their final paychecks. She had even been dipping into the worker pension fund that Dad had faithfully contributed to for 2 decades. But the worst part, the part that made my hands shake as I reviewed David's final report, was that Madison was already preparing to throw Dad under the bus. David had found evidence that she was planning to claim Dad had authorized all the transfers, that he was the mastermind behind what would soon be exposed as a massive embezzlement scheme. She was going to let her own father face criminal charges to save herself. The flight attendant dimmed the cabin lights, and I closed my laptop, leaning back in my seat. Dad thought he was calling his responsible son to bail out his daughter's gambling problem. He had no idea that his golden child was a criminal who was about to destroy his life, his business, and his freedom. But I wasn't running away to Denver to hide. I was positioning myself for the fight that was coming, because in the carry-on bag above my head was a small cardboard box that I had left on my front doorstep before leaving for the airport. And when Dad went to my house tomorrow morning to demand his money, that box was going to shatter every illusion he had ever held about his precious Madison. 2 hours into the flight, somewhere over the mountains of Montana, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I had discovered. The plane was quiet except for the steady hum of engines, and most passengers had settled into sleep. But sleep was impossible for me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the evidence that would destroy my family. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos David Chen had sent me just yesterday. Madison's signature next to Dad's on a loan document, but David's handwriting analysis had proven that Madison had forged Dad's name. Security camera footage from the bank showing Madison making large cash withdrawals, using checks she had written on company accounts without authorization. Phone records showing dozens of calls between Madison and someone named Carlos Rivera, calls that David had traced to a known gambling operation with ties to money laundering. The deeper David had dug, the more twisted Madison's scheme became. She had not just been stealing from Dad's construction company. She had been using Hartwell Contracting as a front to wash money for Carlos's criminal organization. The legitimate construction jobs were real, but Madison had been inflating invoices, creating fake subcontractor payments, and funneling dirty money through Dad's business accounts. 3 weeks ago, David had presented me with the complete picture. Madison owed $820,000, not to a casino or poker room, but to Carlos Rivera's criminal network. She had been skimming money from both sides, stealing from Dad while also shorting her payments to Carlos. Now Carlos was demanding his money, and Madison had convinced Dad that it was just a gambling debt that needed to be paid quickly and quietly. But Carlos was not just a bookie. He was part of an organization that used construction companies across Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia to launder drug money. Madison had recruited Dad's business because it had a solid reputation and long-term city contracts that made it perfect for their needs. Dad was completely unaware that his company was being used to clean money from methamphetamine distribution. The most sickening part was how Madison had manipulated Dad's love for her. Every time he had noticed irregularities in the books, she had cried and claimed she was just trying to help the business grow. When employees complained about missing paychecks, she convinced Dad they were disgruntled workers trying to cause trouble. When clients called about payments that never reached their accounts, Madison told Dad they were lying to get free work, and Dad had believed her every time. Not because he was stupid, but because he could not bear to see his daughter as anything other than the perfect little girl who used to bring him drawings and sit on his lap while he read her bedtime stories. I opened my laptop again and accessed the secure email account where David had been sending his reports. The final message, sent just 6 hours ago, contained the information that had made me book this flight to Denver, instead of simply handing over the money Dad demanded. David had discovered that Madison was planning to disappear. She had opened bank accounts in Nevada and Arizona under a false name. She had been slowly moving money from the embezzled funds to these accounts, preparing for the moment when everything fell apart. Her plan was simple: let Dad pay the $820,000 to Carlos, then vanish before anyone realized the full scope of her crimes. But there was more. David had found evidence that Madison was not planning to disappear alone. Carlos Rivera had been helping her prepare for this moment, and in exchange, she had promised to give him access to Dad's business contacts and client list. Carlos intended to use Hartwell Contracting's reputation to expand his money laundering operation to other construction companies in Ohio. The final piece of evidence was the most damning. David had managed to record a phone conversation between Madison and Carlos from 2 days ago, using surveillance equipment he had placed in Madison's apartment. In that conversation, Madison had laughed about how easy it was to manipulate Dad, how she had been playing the poor little girl card for years to get whatever she wanted. She had even joked about how Dad would probably die of a heart attack when he finally learned the truth, and how that would solve a lot of problems for her. That recording was what had pushed me over the edge. That was when I realized that Madison was not just a thief or a gambling addict. She was a sociopath who saw Dad as nothing more than a resource to be exploited, and she was willing to destroy him completely, to save herself. As the plane began its descent toward Denver, I made one final phone call. The number connected me to FBI agent Sarah Mitchell, the federal prosecutor David had been working with for the past month. Agent Mitchell, this is Eric Hartwell. I'm ready to move forward with the operation we discussed. Are you certain about this, Eric? Once we begin, there will be no going back. I looked out the airplane window at the lights of Denver below, thinking about the box I had left on my doorstep in Seattle. Inside that box were copies of every piece of evidence David and I had gathered, along with a detailed letter explaining everything I had discovered about Madison's crimes. There were also contact cards for Agent Mitchell and David Chen, and a note telling Dad that the FBI was ready to offer him immunity in exchange for his cooperation in building a case against Carlos Rivera's criminal network. I'm certain, I told Agent Mitchell. My father is going to find that box in about 6 hours. When he does, he's going to call you. And when he calls, you need to be ready to move fast, because Madison is planning to run. We'll be ready, Agent Mitchell assured me. Your information has been invaluable in helping us understand how this money laundering operation works. We've been trying to build a case against Rivera for 2 years. I ended the call as the plane touched down in Denver. Dad thought I was running away, abandoning the family when they needed me most. But I was not running from the problem. I was forcing a confrontation that would finally expose the truth about Madison and give Dad a chance to save himself before it was too late. The real question was whether Dad would be strong enough to face the reality about his golden child, or whether 30 years of willful blindness had made it impossible for him to see Madison for who she really was. I checked into a hotel near the Denver airport and tried to get some sleep, but my mind kept racing through memories that I was finally allowing myself to see clearly. The phone call from Dad had been the breaking point, but the foundation had been cracking for years. 2 years ago, during Thanksgiving dinner, I had noticed Dad looking stressed and older than his 61 years. When I asked him about it privately, he had brushed off my concerns, saying business was just tough and Madison was helping him modernize the company's financial systems. But I remembered catching a glimpse of his credit card statement on his kitchen counter, showing a balance of $37,000 on a card that used to be paid off every month. Last Christmas, Dad's longtime foreman, Bobby Wilson, had pulled me aside at the company holiday party. Bobby had been with Hartwell Contracting for 18 years and was like family to us, but he looked worried as he told me about some changes he had noticed. Eric, I don't want to speak out of turn, Bobby had said, glancing around to make sure Madison wasn't nearby, but some weird things have been happening. Good workers are getting fired for reasons that don't make sense, and I haven't seen their final paychecks processed properly. And last month, that big job for the city council building, the client called me directly asking where their completion payment went, but Madison told me it had been sent weeks ago. I had promised Bobby I would look into it, but when I mentioned it to Dad, he had gotten defensive and angry in a way that was completely unlike him. He accused me of not trusting Madison, and reminded me of all the ways she had been helping the business. That reaction had told me everything I needed to know about how deep the problem went. But the most painful memory came flooding back as I lay in that hotel bed at 3 in the morning. 6 months ago, I had driven down to Dayton to help Dad with some computer issues at the office. I arrived early and let myself in with the key Dad had given me years before. The office was empty except for Madison, who was sitting at Dad's desk with financial documents spread everywhere and her laptop open to what looked like banking websites. When she saw me, Madison had quickly closed the laptop and started gathering up the papers. Oh, Eric, you scared me. Dad's not here yet. I was just trying to organize these invoices for him. But in the few seconds before she closed the laptop, I had seen enough. Bank account numbers that I didn't recognize. Transfer amounts in the tens of thousands of dollars. And a notepad with what looked like Dad's signature practiced over and over in Madison's handwriting. I had not confronted her then. Instead, I had made some excuse about coming back later and left. But that image had haunted me for months, especially as Dad's stress levels increased and his financial situation seemed to worsen despite what should have been a successful year for the construction business. Now, lying in this Denver hotel room, I finally allowed myself to face the truth I had been avoiding. Dad knew. Maybe not the full extent of what Madison was doing, but he knew something was wrong, and instead of stopping her, he had been covering for her. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson in Seattle. "Eric, honey, there are some people at your house asking about you. Should I be concerned?" I smiled grimly and texted back. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Patterson. They'll be gone soon." At exactly 7:30 Denver time, which was 8:30 in Seattle, my phone rang. Dad's number appeared on the screen, but when I answered, his voice was completely different from the demanding tone he had used the night before. "Eric, what the hell is this box? What are you trying to do to this family?" I sat up in bed, knowing this moment would determine everything that happened next. "Dad, did you read the letter?" "I read enough." "You think Madison is some kind of criminal? You think I don't know what's going on in my own business? This is insane, Eric. This is your sister we're talking about." "Dad, did you call Agent Mitchell yet?" There was a long silence. Then Dad's voice came back, smaller and more frightened than I had ever heard it. "Why is the FBI involved in this?" "Eric, what have you done?" "I've done what you should have done 3 years ago. I've stopped enabling a criminal." "She's not a criminal. She made some mistakes, but she's not a criminal. She's your sister, for God's sake." "Dad, listen to me very carefully. Madison has stolen over $2 million from your company. She's been forging your signature on loan documents. She's been using Hartwell Contracting to launder money for drug dealers. And she's been planning to let you take the blame for all of it." I heard Dad's breathing become heavy and labored. "You're lying. You're jealous of her. You always have been. You can't stand that she's creative and free while you're stuck in your boring little computer world." That accusation hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Dad, the evidence is all there. David Chen spent 6 weeks documenting everything. Agent Mitchell has been building a federal case. This is not about jealousy. This is about Madison destroying everything you've worked for and preparing to destroy you too. I won't listen to this anymore. I won't let you tear this family apart with your lies." "Then call Agent Mitchell. Ask her to show you the recorded conversation where Madison laughs about manipulating you. Ask her to show you the bank records proving Madison opened secret accounts in other states. Ask her about the money laundering operation that Madison recruited your business for." The line went quiet for so long that I thought Dad had hung up. Finally, his voice came back, barely a whisper. "What recorded conversation?" That was when I knew that some part of Dad already understood the truth. He was just too scared and too heartbroken to face it. "Dad, Madison doesn't love you the way you love her. She's been using your love as a weapon against you for years, but it's not too late to save yourself. Agent Mitchell can offer you immunity if you cooperate with their investigation. You can save your business, your reputation, and your freedom. But only if you act now, before Madison runs." Another long silence. Then, in a voice that sounded like it belonged to a broken old man, Dad asked, "Where is she planning to run?" And that was when I knew that despite 30 years of enabling and denial, my father was finally ready to see his golden child for who she really was. At 10:15 the next morning, I was sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Denver when my phone started buzzing with notifications from my home security system. I opened the app and watched in real time as Dad's pickup truck pulled into my driveway in Seattle, followed by Madison's silver Honda and a third vehicle I didn't recognize. Through the security cameras, I could see Dad getting out of his truck with a grim expression, Madison crying and gesturing frantically, and a large man in a work shirt emerging from the third vehicle. I recognized him immediately from family photos as my Uncle Ray, Dad's younger brother who owned a locksmith business in Columbus. They were not there to talk. They were there to take what they thought I owed them. I pulled out my laptop and connected to the security system's audio feed, listening as Madison's voice carried across my front yard. "Daddy, he has to have the money somewhere in there. His bank account shows he has enough. If he won't give it to us willingly, then we have to take it before Carlos hurts someone. Dad looked uncomfortable but determined. Ray, you sure you can get us in without triggering any alarms? I've been doing this for 20 years, David. Your boy might be smart with computers, but locks are locks. I couldn't help but smile as I watched this unfold. Dad was so focused on getting into my house that he hadn't noticed the unmarked sedan parked across the street with 2 people sitting in it, who were very obviously federal agents. Agent Mitchell had explained the plan to me during our phone call 3 hours earlier. The FBI had been watching Carlos Rivera's organization for months, but they needed evidence of the money laundering operation to make arrests that would stick in court. Madison's crimes had given them the perfect opportunity to flip someone inside the organization and gather that evidence. Your father's cooperation is crucial, Agent Mitchell had said. But we need him to see with his own eyes how deep this goes. Sometimes people have to watch their world fall apart before they're ready to rebuild it honestly. As I watched through the security feed, Uncle Ray approached my front door with his locksmith tools, while Madison paced nervously and Dad stood guard. None of them had noticed that their every move was being recorded by multiple cameras and microphones that I had installed after a break-in in my neighborhood 6 months ago. Ray had barely touched the lock when the unmarked sedan's doors opened and 2 people in FBI jackets approached my house. Agent Mitchell was a tall woman with graying hair and the kind of calm authority that comes from 20 years of federal law enforcement. Her partner, Agent Torres, was younger but had the same steady presence. "Excuse me, folks," Agent Mitchell called out in a voice that carried across the yard. "I'm going to need you to step away from that door." The reaction was immediate and telling. Madison's face went white with terror, and she started backing toward her car. Uncle Ray looked confused but quickly raised his hands and moved away from the door. But Dad's reaction was what broke my heart. He looked relieved. "Are you FBI Agent Mitchell?" Dad asked. "I am. And you must be David Hartwell. Your son Eric said you might be ready to have a conversation with us." Madison's voice became shrill with panic. "Daddy, don't talk to them. We need to get the money and go. Carlos said, if we don't have it by tonight, he's going to start hurting people." That was when Agent Mitchell made her move. "Madison Hartwell, you're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent." Madison completely lost control. No, this is all wrong. Daddy, tell them this is all wrong. I was just trying to help the business. I was just trying to make us more money." But as Agent Torres handcuffed Madison, she revealed more than she intended. "I can give you Carlos Rivera. I can give you his whole operation. He forced me to do this. He said he would kill my family if I didn't help him." Agent Mitchell paused in reading Miranda rights. "What can you tell us about Carlos Rivera?" Madison's desperation made her sloppy. "He's been using construction companies all over Ohio to wash money from his drug operation. He has cops on his payroll, judges, even city councilmen. I can give you names, account numbers, everything." Dad stood there watching his daughter confess to crimes he had never imagined she was capable of. His face showed a mixture of shock, heartbreak, and something else that I recognized from my security camera. The expression of a man finally seeing clearly after years of willful blindness. "Madison," Dad said quietly, "is what Eric said true? Have you been stealing from the company?" Madison turned to him with tears streaming down her face, and for a moment she looked like the little girl who used to crawl into his lap when she was scared. "Daddy, I never meant for it to go this far. It started small, just borrowing a little money here and there. But Carlos found out, and he said he would expose everything unless I helped him. I was trying to protect you. How much money, Madison?" Madison's shoulders sagged as the fight went out of her. $2.7 million over 3 years. "But I can pay it back. If you just give Carlos what he wants tonight, I can fix this." Dad aged 10 years in that moment. The daughter he had protected and defended for 32 years had just confessed to stealing nearly $3 million and involving his business in a criminal organization. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built, was gone because of the person he loved most. Agent Mitchell stepped closer to Dad. "Mr. Hartwell, your son has been working with us for several weeks. The information he provided has been invaluable in understanding how this money laundering operation works. We're prepared to offer you immunity from prosecution in exchange for your cooperation in building our case against Rivera's organization. Dad looked at the camera that he finally noticed mounted on my garage, knowing I was watching this unfold from hundreds of miles away. My son set this up? Your son saved your life, Agent Mitchell said. Madison and Carlos Rivera were planning to let you take the blame for the money laundering operation. Eric's investigation prevented you from becoming a scapegoat for their crimes. As they loaded Madison into the FBI vehicle, she screamed one final revelation that made my blood run cold. Tell Eric this isn't over. Tell him Carlos knows where he is, and Carlos doesn't forget. That threat confirmed what I had suspected from the beginning. Madison was not just a victim who had gotten in over her head. She was a willing participant in a criminal organization, and she had put my life in danger by involving me in her schemes. But as I watched Dad finally see his daughter for who she really was, I knew the hardest part was just beginning. The golden child was gone, and now Dad had to find a way to live with the truth about everything he had enabled and ignored. 3 hours after watching Madison's arrest through my security cameras, I was sitting in Agent Mitchell's Denver field office, participating in a video conference with prosecutors from Ohio who were coordinating the largest money laundering investigation in the state's recent history. Eric, the information your private investigator gathered has been extraordinary, said Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh from her office in Columbus. But we need to move quickly. Carlos Rivera's organization is sophisticated, and they'll start destroying evidence the moment they realize Madison has been arrested. Agent Mitchell pulled up a map on her laptop screen. We've identified 12 construction companies across Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia that we believe are part of Rivera's money laundering network. Your father's company was just one piece of a much larger operation. What I learned in that conference room was staggering. Carlos Rivera was not just a local criminal. He was part of a methamphetamine distribution network that stretched from Mexico to Canada, using legitimate businesses to wash millions of dollars in drug money. Madison had not been an innocent victim manipulated by criminals. She had been an active recruiter, using her charm and Dad's reputation to bring other construction companies into the organization. How many other families has she destroyed? I asked. We're still investigating, but we believe Madison was responsible for recruiting at least 6 other companies over the past 2 years. In each case, she approached family-owned construction businesses with good reputations and city contracts. She would befriend the owners, often targeting men her age or older, who were vulnerable to her manipulation. Agent Mitchell showed me photos from surveillance operations. Madison at restaurants with middle-aged businessmen, Madison touring construction sites, Madison attending industry conferences and networking events. She had been operating like a professional con artist, not the troubled daughter Dad thought she was. The pattern was always the same, Agent Walsh explained. Madison would identify businesses that were struggling financially or had family drama she could exploit. She would offer to help with bookkeeping or administrative work, then slowly introduce irregularities that could be explained away. Once the business was compromised, Carlos Rivera's people would approach the owners with threats and demands for cooperation. My phone buzzed with a call from Dad. When I answered, his voice was hollow and exhausted. Eric, I just spent 3 hours with the FBI. They showed me things I never imagined Madison was capable of. How are you holding up, Dad? I don't know. I keep thinking about all the signs I ignored, all the times people tried to warn me about her behavior. Your friend Bobby Wilson tried to tell me something was wrong. Mrs. Henderson from the bank called me twice about suspicious transactions. Even Madison's ex-husband Tom tried to warn me that she had stolen money from their joint account before their divorce. I could hear the guilt and self-recrimination in Dad's voice, but I also heard something else. Clarity. For the first time in years, Dad was seeing the situation without the filter of parental denial. Dad, Agent Mitchell said, you agreed to cooperate with the investigation. I signed the papers an hour ago. Eric, they showed me evidence that Madison was planning to have me killed, not just blamed for her crimes, but actually murdered. Carlos Rivera has killed other business owners who became liabilities to his operation. That revelation hit me like a physical blow. What do you mean? 2 other construction company owners who got involved with Rivera's organization died in what looked like accidents over the past year. One fell from scaffolding at a job site. The other died in a single-car accident on a road he had driven safely for 20 years. The FBI believes both were murders, staged to look like accidents. Agent Mitchell took the phone from me. "Mr. Hartwell, this is Agent Mitchell. Can you tell Eric what you found in Madison's apartment?" Dad's voice became even more strained. "When the FBI searched her place, they found a life insurance policy on me that Madison had taken out 6 months ago. $2 million payout. And they found text messages between Madison and Carlos discussing how my death would solve several problems at once. I felt sick. My sister had not just been stealing from Dad. She had been planning to have him killed. Eric," Dad continued, "there's something else you need to know. Madison told the FBI that Carlos Rivera knows about you, knows about your business, knows where you live. She gave them information about your security system, your daily routines, even your travel patterns. You're in danger because of what you discovered." Agent Mitchell nodded grimly. "That's why we brought you to Denver, Eric. Rivera's organization has resources and reach that extend far beyond Ohio. We need to keep you safe while we roll up the entire network." Over the next hour, Agent Mitchell explained the full scope of the operation they were planning. Using the evidence I had gathered and Dad's testimony, they were prepared to arrest 23 people across 4 states in a coordinated operation that would happen simultaneously to prevent anyone from escaping or destroying evidence. "Your father's cooperation is crucial because he can provide inside information about how the money laundering worked," Agent Mitchell said. "But Eric, your role is equally important. Madison recruited other businesses by using your success story as an example. She told other business owners that her brother was a successful entrepreneur who had helped the family business grow. You were part of her sales pitch." The irony was devastating. Madison had been using my legitimate success to give credibility to her criminal operation. My reputation had been weaponized to destroy other families. But then Agent Mitchell revealed the most shocking twist of all. "Eric, we have evidence that Madison was planning to recruit your software consulting business into Rivera's operation. The gambling debt she claimed to have was actually an excuse to get access to your business accounts and client list. She was going to use your company's reputation to expand their money laundering into the technology sector." Everything clicked into place. Madison's sudden interest in my business over the past year, her questions about my clients and financial processes, her suggestions that I should consider expanding to Ohio and working with construction companies. She had been setting me up to become the next victim of her recruitment operation. "When Rivera's people realize that Madison has been arrested and that you were the one who exposed their operation, they're going to come after you," Agent Walsh warned from the video conference. "We're prepared to offer you witness protection, but first we need your help to complete this investigation." I looked at the evidence files spread across Agent Mitchell's desk. Photos of murdered business owners, financial records showing millions of dollars in drug money, communication intercepts revealing plans to expand the operation nationally. Madison was not just a troubled daughter who had made bad choices. She was a key player in a criminal organization that had destroyed dozens of lives. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. Agent Mitchell smiled for the first time since I had met her. "We need you to help us save your father's life and put Carlos Rivera in prison for the rest of his life." 6 months later, I stood in the federal courthouse in Columbus, Ohio, watching my sister face the consequences of her choices. The courtroom was packed with victims of Rivera's money laundering operation, FBI agents who had worked on the case, and prosecutors who had spent months building an airtight case against everyone involved. Madison looked smaller and older than I remembered. Gone was the confident, manipulative woman who had charmed her way through life. Prison had stripped away the facade, revealing someone who finally understood that actions have consequences. The scope of the operation had been even larger than anyone initially realized. The coordinated arrests 6 months ago had netted 37 people across 5 states. Carlos Rivera's organization had been washing between $15 and $20 million per year through legitimate businesses, mostly construction and landscaping companies that dealt in cash transactions. But the human cost was what filled the courtroom that day. 8 business owners whose companies had been destroyed. Dozens of employees who had lost their jobs when their employers were arrested. Families torn apart by the revelation that their loved ones were involved in criminal activities. Judge Patricia Coleman called the court to order, and I watched as Madison stood to hear her sentence. She had attempted to flee to Mexico with Carlos Rivera 3 weeks after her arrest, but the FBI had been monitoring their communications and arrested them at the airport in El Paso with fake passports and $2 million in cash from hidden accounts. During the investigation, the full scope of Madison's crimes had emerged. She had stolen $8.4 million from various sources over 3 years. She had recruited 17 businesses into Rivera's money laundering operation. She had been involved in planning the murders of 2 business owners who had threatened to expose the operation, and she had been preparing to recruit my software consulting business as the next victim. Madison Hartwell, Judge Coleman said, your crimes represent a betrayal of trust on multiple levels. You betrayed your family, your community, and the legitimate business owners who trusted you. Your actions directly contributed to an operation that brought violence and corruption into communities across multiple states. Madison's attorney, a public defender who had been assigned to her case after she spent all her stolen money on her failed escape attempt, stood to make a final plea for leniency. But there was little to say. Madison had been caught with overwhelming evidence, and her cooperation with prosecutors had been minimal and self-serving. Your Honor, the defense attorney said, my client was manipulated by Carlos Rivera and his organization. She was a victim who got in over her head and made poor choices out of fear. But Assistant U.S. Attorney Walsh was ready for that argument. She presented evidence from recorded conversations where Madison laughed about manipulating stupid old men and bragged about how easy it was to play the victim card when anyone questioned her activities. Your Honor, the defendant was not a victim. She was a predator who used her family relationships and personal charm to destroy the lives of innocent people. The evidence shows that she enjoyed the power and control that came with her role in this criminal organization. Judge Coleman reviewed the evidence file, then looked directly at Madison. Miss Hartwell, do you have anything to say before I impose sentence? Madison stood slowly, and for a moment I thought she might finally show genuine remorse. Instead, she delivered a statement that revealed the true depth of her narcissism and lack of empathy. Your Honor, I never intended for anyone to get hurt. I was just trying to help my family's business succeed. If my father had been more supportive of my ideas, if my brother had been willing to help me when I needed it, none of this would have happened. I made mistakes, but I was abandoned by the people who should have helped me. Even facing 25 years in federal prison, Madison was still blaming everyone else for her choices. She had learned nothing and felt no genuine remorse for the lives she had destroyed. Judge Coleman's response was swift and decisive. Miss Hartwell, you have shown no genuine acceptance of responsibility for your actions. You have expressed no real remorse for the victims of your crimes. Your statement today confirms that you represent a continued danger to society. I hereby sentence you to 25 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for 15 years. You will also pay restitution in the amount of $8.4 million to your victims. As the bailiffs led Madison away, she looked directly at me for the first time since entering the courtroom. Her expression was not one of sadness or regret. It was pure hatred. Even now, she blamed me for her downfall rather than accepting responsibility for her choices. After the sentencing, Dad and I walked out of the courthouse together. He had testified as a prosecution witness, providing crucial information about how Madison had manipulated him and used his business for money laundering. His testimony had been painful but necessary, as he publicly acknowledged his role in enabling Madison's behavior over the years. How do you feel? I asked him as we stood on the courthouse steps. Relieved, he said after a long moment. For the first time in years, I feel like I can see clearly. Madison is gone, but the person I thought she was never really existed anyway. Dad had used the past 6 months to rebuild his life honestly. He had sold Hartwell Contracting to pay restitution to the victims of Madison's crimes. He had moved to a small apartment and taken a job at a hardware store, starting over at 61 years old. But he seemed happier and more at peace than he had in years. Eric, I owe you an apology, Dad said. I spent so many years making excuses for Madison that I forgot to appreciate the son who never caused me any problems. You saved my life, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. That apology meant more to me than any amount of money Madison had stolen or any sentence the judge had imposed. For the first time in our relationship, Dad was seeing me clearly, without the distortion of favoritism and enabling that had defined our family for decades. Carlos Rivera had been sentenced to life in prison without parole. The other members of his organization received sentences ranging from 10 to 30 years. The money laundering network had been completely dismantled, and law enforcement agencies were using the case as a model for investigating similar operations across the country. But the most important outcome was not the criminal sentences or the money recovered. It was the fact that Dad and I finally had a chance to build a real relationship based on honesty and mutual respect, instead of the toxic family dynamics that had nearly destroyed us all. 2 years after Madison's sentencing, Dad and I were working together in the workshop behind his small apartment, building a bookshelf for his neighbor, Mrs. Chen. It was a Saturday morning in early spring, and the cherry tree outside the window was blooming for the first time since he had moved in. "Hand me that level, Eric," Dad said, carefully adjusting a shelf bracket. "Mrs. Chen wants this perfect for her grandson's room." I watched Dad work with the same attention to detail that had made Hartwell Contracting successful for 30 years. At 63, he was starting over with nothing but his skills and his integrity, but he seemed genuinely content with this simpler life. "Dad, do you ever regret how everything turned out?" I asked. He paused in his work and considered the question carefully. "I regret that it took so long for me to see the truth about Madison. I regret the years I wasted, enabling her behavior, and the people who got hurt because I was too blind to stop her. But I don't regret where we are now." Dad had spent the past 2 years in therapy, learning about codependency and the psychology of enabling. He attended weekly meetings for families of addicts and criminals, where he found support from other parents who had struggled with similar situations. Most importantly, he had learned to accept responsibility for his role in Madison's crimes, without taking responsibility for her choices. "The hardest part was accepting that the Madison I loved never really existed," Dad said. "I was in love with an idea of who I wanted her to be, not who she actually was, and my refusal to see the truth enabled her to become something much worse than she might have been if I had held her accountable from the beginning." I had also used the past 2 years for growth and healing. My software consulting business had thrived, partly because the integrity I had shown during the investigation had earned me respect in the business community. But more importantly, I had learned valuable lessons about family relationships and the difference between love and enabling. "Eric, I need to tell you something I should have said years ago," Dad said, setting down his tools. "I'm proud of you, not just for exposing Madison's crimes, but for the man you became despite growing up in a family that didn't treat you fairly. You could have become bitter and resentful, but instead you became someone with integrity and courage. That acknowledgement healed wounds that had been festering for decades. Growing up as the responsible child in a family that celebrated dysfunction had been painful and isolating. But Dad's recognition of that unfairness, and his commitment to building a better relationship with me, had made the struggle worthwhile. My personal life had also found new stability. 6 months after the trial, I had met Jennifer Walsh, the assistant U.S. attorney who had prosecuted Madison's case. Our relationship had grown slowly and carefully, built on shared values of honesty and accountability. Jennifer understood the importance of truth and justice in ways that most people never would, and her strength and integrity inspired me to be better. "How's Jennifer doing with the new case?" Dad asked. "She's working on another money laundering investigation, this one involving real estate fraud. The Rivera case has become a model for how to investigate these complex financial crimes. Jennifer and I had been together for 18 months, and I was planning to propose to her next month during a trip to Colorado. She represented everything I valued: intelligence, integrity, strength, and the courage to do what's right, even when it's difficult." The Rivera case had also led to changes in federal law enforcement. The techniques developed during the investigation were now being taught to agents across the country. The cooperation between federal and state agencies had become a model for similar operations, and the victim restitution program had been expanded to help families recover from financial crimes. But the most meaningful outcome was the nonprofit organization I had started with some of the other victims' families. The Foundation for Financial Accountability provided resources and support for families dealing with embezzlement, fraud, and other financial crimes committed by relatives. We offered counseling services, legal advice, and support groups for people struggling with the complex emotions that come with being victimized by someone they love. The foundation helped 3 families this month, I told Dad. A woman whose son stole from her retirement account, a man whose daughter was using his business credit cards for drug purchases, and parents whose adult son had been forging their signatures on loan applications. How do you help them? We help them understand that love doesn't mean enabling destructive behavior. We teach them how to set boundaries, how to protect themselves financially, and how to support their loved one's recovery without becoming victims themselves. Dad nodded thoughtfully. I wish something like that had existed when I first noticed Madison's problems. Maybe I would have learned to help her in ways that actually helped instead of ways that made things worse. As we finished Mrs. Chen's bookshelf, I reflected on the profound life lesson that our family's destruction and rebuilding had taught me. Real love requires courage. It requires the willingness to see people as they truly are, not as we wish they were. It requires holding people accountable for their actions, even when accountability is painful for everyone involved. The path of least resistance is often the path of greatest harm. Every time Dad had chosen to believe Madison's lies rather than face the truth, he had enabled her to become more manipulative and more dangerous. Every time he had bailed her out instead of letting her face consequences, he had robbed her of opportunities to learn and change. But perhaps most importantly, I had learned that it's never too late to choose truth over comfort, accountability over enabling, and authentic love over destructive sentimentality. Dad's transformation from an enabling parent to someone who demanded honesty and accountability had been painful but ultimately healing for both of us. Eric, Dad said as we loaded the finished bookshelf into his truck, I know I can't undo the years I lost to denial and favoritism, but I want you to know that these past 2 years, working with you and building something honest together, have been some of the best of my life. Mine too, Dad. As we drove to deliver the bookshelf to Mrs. Chen, I thought about Madison, who was serving her sentence in a federal prison in West Virginia. She had refused all contact with Dad and me since her conviction, still blaming us for her downfall. The prison counselor said Madison showed no signs of genuine remorse or desire for rehabilitation. Some people, even when faced with the full consequences of their actions, choose to remain victims of their own choices rather than take responsibility for change. But Dad and I had chosen differently. We had chosen the painful path of truth and accountability, and that choice had led us to something better than what we had lost. Our relationship was now built on reality rather than illusion, on mutual respect rather than codependency, and on love that demanded the best from each other rather than love that enabled the worst. The foundation I had learned was simple but profound. You cannot save someone by allowing them to destroy themselves and others. Real love sometimes requires you to say no, to set boundaries, to demand accountability even when it causes pain. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is refusing to enable someone's destructive behavior, even if they hate you for it. As we carried Mrs. Chen's bookshelf up to her apartment, Dad and I were building something together that would last. Not just furniture, but a relationship based on truth, respect, and the kind of love that makes people better rather than worse. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between enabling someone you love and holding them accountable for their actions? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about family challenges and personal growth. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of healthy boundaries in relationships, please share this story with them. Thank you for listening. And remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior, even when it breaks your heart to do it.